Shalom, and welcome to V'ahavta Yisrael, a Hebrew phrase which means you shall love Israel. We hope you'll stay with us for the next 30 minutes as our teacher, Dr. Baruch, shares his expository teaching from the Bible. Dr. Baruch is the senior lecturer at the Zera Avraham Institute based in Israel. Although all courses are taught in Hebrew at the Institute, Dr. Baruch is pleased to share this weekly address in English. To find out more about our work in Israel, please visit us on the web at LoveIsrael.org. That's one word, LoveIsrael.org. Now, here's Baruch with today's lesson.
God is indeed a God of restoration. He is indeed a God of deliverance. And God will move in our life in order to position us where His will would have us to be. The question that we have to answer is this: are we desiring this? Do we want our lives to be conformed to the will of God? That we might do the things that He would have us to do for one purpose, not for blessing in our life, not for what we might receive, but rather for what might we do for the sake of others. That we might be blessed to be a blessing to them. What we might receive, that we might give to others. Do we truly want to be that vessel? Well, to be in that case, we need God actively involved in our life. And there are things that hinder that. We're talking about leprosy, and leprosy brought about a great obstacle for people. And again, most commentators see that leprosy did not happen by chance, but it happened as a divine punishment upon those who were not thinking humbly, not thinking according to the will of God, but thinking about themselves, them being selfish, and them being committed to what they wanted, rather than seeing themselves walking submissively to the purposes and the plans of God. So before we begin tonight, we need to ask ourselves, who are we in Messiah? Have we believed a lie? That God is there to serve us and to help us achieve what we want? That is not the faith of Scripture. That is falsehood. It is deception. It is a Christianized form of idolatry. People might say His name, but they are certainly not living according to His character. So when we use His name, we need to understand that we're called to exemplify, to demonstrate to others, to bear witness of His character in our life, to think as He would have us to think and to act as He would have us to act. And when we are thinking incorrectly, when we are viewing others incorrectly, when we're sizing them up according to what we want from them or how we think they should behave, and if they don't meet our standards, then we have contempt, we're judgmental, and we're unkind. That is the spirit that brings punishment upon us. Look, if you would, to the book of Leviticus and chapter 13. For the last 2 weeks, we have been studying some laws dealing with leprosy, and we are going to continue this evening in that same chapter, dealing with these same issues. But here we find out that leprosy may not only be upon the skin, but leprosy can also appear in other places. So let's begin. Look with me, as I said, the book of Leviticus, chapter 13. We're going to begin where we left off last week with verse 40, where it says, a man that, and we have a word for being lost or falling out, being removed, and that is his head. Now, when we say his head, we're talking, and there's no disagreement among the scholars, and most translators will just put this in. We're talking about hair. So we've seen there's been an emphasis upon skin, and the color of the hair is significant, but now, for the most part, we're talking about hair. So it says here in verse 40, a man that his head, and the implication is, context demands this, the hair of his head is falling out. So he's losing his hair, and it says, koreach hu. Koreach is a word for being bald. So his hair has been removed. Not by him, but it has simply fallen out. Now, we have to ask, is this a natural baldness, or is it something that happened, and the context and the commentators would say something that is abnormal, something that happens quickly, something that shows there is a problem. This is not normal. So we're not talking about what some would call male pattern baldness. We're talking about something that's unique, that's different. And if this is the case, that his hair has fallen out just rapidly, well, it says here, tahor hu, he is clean. Just the fact that one's hair falls out doesn't necessarily mean that there is a problem, that there is leprosy. So read carefully and pay attention to what the scripture is saying. Hair is removed, not by man, but it falls out from a man. And if this is a case, in and of itself, he is still pure. There is nothing going on here that he needs to deal with. But keep reading verse 41. And then we have the word peah. It's in the construct form, and the peah has to do with this part of the head here. So not the normal place where hair falls out, but we're talking about the side. So where the peot, many people are familiar with the curls that many within the Haredi community, especially the Hasidim, wear. We're talking about that location. And it says here, verse 41, and if the corners of the face, meaning here, the temples where we're referring to, if, again, his head shall fall out, it's not talking about the head, obviously, but the hair of the head, and this is upon this place, it says that he is a gibeach hu. And this means where he was koreach, now it's simply saying that this is a baldness of the front portion of his head, and we're talking about the temple area. So this is his status. And again, look at the end of verse 41. It says, tahor hu, he is still pure. There's nothing that needs to be done if simply the hair falls out, even if it's done unusually, meaning in a rapid way, or not at a older age, but simply it takes place. Maybe he is older, but his hair has stayed with him, but now rapidly it has left. If this is the case, there is no problem as of yet. Look now to verse 42. And for if there will be in, and we have korachat, and this is in the baldness. If it's in the baldness or in the gabachat, this is in the temple area, is a plague. Now there's a change. We just don't have the absence of hair. We have a plague, an ailment. And this is what we've talked about in other places in this 13th chapter, where it says, if there is a white or white reddish ailment, if this is the case, so the hair quickly fell out, and now in that place where the hair was, whether it's the top of his head or in the temple area, now we have an ailment, a plague. And this can mean simply a change in the pigmentation of his skin. And if that change is a reddish white, it says here, sara'at, that is leprosy, has broken out, whether it be in the normal bald places of his head or whether it be upon his temples in that area. Regardless, if he has this whitish, reddish discoloration of his scalp or of his temples, therefore there is a change. And what is he? Well, we're going to find out what he should do. Verse 43. And the priest shall look at him. So the priest is going to look at him, and the implication, obviously, look at these areas where there's that whitish, reddish change. And behold, if there is this lifting up of the ailment, where this discoloration has happened, if indeed that it is white or reddish, whether it's in the upper portion of his head or upon his temple, this is as the appearance of Sarat, of the skin of his flesh. If this is the case, what do? Well, look at verse 44. If this is what happens, then it says, verse 44, Ish Sarua, a leprous man is he. And now, because of not just the hair falling out, but after the hair has fallen out, or with the hair falling out, if there is this whitish, reddish discoloring of the skin, a change in pigmentation, then we have, and there's nothing uncertain about it, it says here that this one is indeed a leprous man, and he is unclean. And the priests shall proclaim this one unclean in his head. And in his head is this ailment, is this striking, this affliction. Again, whether it's on the scalp or whether it's on the temples. Look now to verse 45. And the leprosy which is in him, if it's in him, but now it says, if the leprosy, this strike is striking, this ailment is in his clothes, it says here, they shall be torn. And that means ripped away. Wherever there's that spot, you have to get rid of it. And if it's will be on his head, so now we see that it's in the hair of his head. Then what should be done? The hair should be uncovered, and also upon his lip there should be covered. So his head is going to be uncovered, his hair is going to be let down, and his lip, his mustache, is what it literally says, safam, his mustache, so that which is above his lip is going to be covered. And unclean he will proclaim. So now we have something that we haven't heard earlier. And that is, and most would say it's applied for all forms of leprosy. It's simply that there is greater revelation now in regard to what is done with someone who is leprous. And that is that this one is supposed to proclaim that he is leprous before others. Verse 46. And all the days which there is an ailment in him, all the days that there's this discolorization, this issue, he is impure. And it says here, being impure, he will dwell alone. Outside the camp is his dwelling place. And I've already made mention to you that frequently this is among the tombs. Why? Well, the tombs were a place of that which is unclean. Because this one is unclean, where can he go? He can't go anywhere within the city. That's why it says out of the camp, and the most common place was where the tombs were. So this is what it's saying. And if he appears before anyone, he has to yell out that he is unclean, unclean. Verse 47. And the garment that will be in it a plague of leprosy. Now we have something that's unique. It's no longer upon the skin. It's no longer upon the beard, meaning on the face, but we're dealing with that which is in a garment. Now, we're going to speak very, very specific about the garment. And we're going to see that over and over we're given some information concerning this garment. And by the way, and this is going to be most relevant in a moment, for the most part, garments were woven. So they would put them on an instrument, which will allow the cloth and the strings that are used, the threads and such, to be woven together in order to make this garment. Look, if you would, at verse 47. And the garment that will be in it a striking or an ailment or an appearance of leprosy. It's that same word that we've learned before, nega, where that leprosy is. It touches. It says, in a garment of wool or in a garment of linen. Now, these were the two most common types of linen or wool was used. The most common type of cloth that was used in making clothes back then. So whether it's in wool or whether it's in linen. Or, look at verse 48. Now we have a word, shti. We have another word, erev. And these two words are used in a very particular way. Now, when garments are made using wool, using linen, they are woven, and you have some of the garments that are, or some of the cloth or the threads that are put lengthways. And then there's some that are put crossways. And we're going to see, if you look, for example, at this, it says, or in, and we have the term here, warp. A warp is those threads that go, if you're weaving from you forward, so back and forth. This is the warp. Now, we also have what's known as the weft, and the weft is crossways. So they're woven together, and it says regardless of where it is, whether it's the warp or whether it's the weft, it says whether it is a linen garment or whether it is a wool garment, or if it's in the skin or in any, or when I say skin, meaning leather, whether it's a leather garment or anything that is made out of leather. So perhaps a sandal. So let's review and see exactly what's being said here. That leprosy may not just be upon the body of the individual. It can be upon the hair, or it can be upon the garments. Now, wool, linen, or leather, or anything that's made of leather. So any of these things are susceptible to acquiring leprosy. And all of this is reviewed in Judaism as a sign that God is displeased with this individual. So ceremonial uncleanliness usually doesn't involve God's displeasure. There are many things that are natural, that when we just live our life, that we're going to encounter, that are going to happen to us, that can render a person unclean, but it has nothing to do with something that is wrong, something that is sinful, or anything of that nature. But leprosy in this context, according to the scholars, has to do with a uncleanliness that is an outcome of sinful behavior, the wrong way of thinking. And that's why the people are treated in this way. Look now to verse 49. And if it should come about this ailment, this striking, this place where there is this discoloration of whether it's a garment, whether it's of cloth, or whether it's of leather, if it becomes yarak, this is green. So if it becomes greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether it is in the warp or whether it's in the weft or in any vessel of leather, If it has this discoloration of these two types, it says nega tzaraat hu. It is a plague or an ailment of leprosy. That's what we're told. And this one must show himself to the priest. The priest will look at this one. Verse 50. And the priest will look at the ailment. And what will he do? Well, it says that he will quarantine this one who has this ailment for 7 days. And he will look at the ailment, this striking where their problem is, on the 7th day. For if if this ailment has spread out in the garment, or in the warp, or in the weft, or in the leather, or in anything that's made with leather, or it has here, if it's made and it spreads out in anything of leather which is made, it says that it is a leprous. And we have here a word. This word in modern Hebrew is a word for something that is malignant. What does that mean? We usually use that in regard to cancer. So if the cancer is malignant, we see or if the tumor is malignant, it means that there's something active going on, something that is destructive. And it uses the same word. The leprosy is malignant. It is active. It is alive. It is destructive, is what's being said in this passage. And therefore, because the leprosy is active, this one is unclean. What should be done? Verse 52. Now, we're talking about here these garments, whether it's of some garment of linen or garment of wool or leather or anything that can be made from leather. All these things are susceptible to leprosy. And if this is the case, look at verse 52. It says here, and he shall burn the garment or the warp or the weft with its wool or its linen or any vessel of leather, which will be in it this plague. So any of these things, whether it is simply in one of these places or another, we have to burn. It must be destroyed. Now, what is that a symbol of? Being burned is oftentimes a symbol of judgment. So this one is going to lose the garment, lose this leather vessel, this thing that's made, whether it's a belt, whether it's shoes or sandals, whatever it may be, it is going to be burnt up. Look now to verse 52 at the end. For it is a malignant leprosy, and therefore with fire it is burnt up. That's what we're told. Now verse 53. And if the priest will see, meaning if he will look at it carefully, and behold, it has not spread out, meaning this ailment has not spread out in the garment, or in the warp, or in the weft, or in any vessel of leather. What should be done at this time? Well, remember, we've looked at it for 7 days. This is at the 7th day it's being examined. And it says, verse 54, the priest will command, and that they will wash that which has this ailment, this appearance, this discoloration, this problem. And they shall quarantine it a second 7 days, just like we saw earlier in this chapter. And the implication is, at the end of that time, what will happen? Look at verse 55. And the priest will look after it has been washed. What has been washed? After the washing of this ailment. And again, this ailment is one that is a discolorization of the linen or the wool Whether it's in just part of it in the warp or in the weft, doesn't make any difference. Whether it's on leather or anything made of leather, the priest has to look at it after it's been washed because it had not spread out. It hasn't gotten worse. Therefore, wash it and then look at it after the washing. And notice what he says. We're in verse 55 again. The priest will look after the washing of this ailment. Behold, if the ailment has not turned, meaning change, to his eye, meaning how it was prior to the washing, now it's been washed again, and there's no change whatsoever. Everything is the same thing. So if it has not changed, that ailment has not changed to his eye, some Bibles will say color. Well, that's the implication, but it's literally the word his eye. And the nega, this ailment has not spread out. What is it? Well, if it has not, it is impure or unclean, and it must be burned with fire. Why? Well, we have a very important word. What it means here, and it's the word pechetet, which means it has kind of wasted away. It's gone down. It's burrowed down into the garment, into the leather, whether it's on the outer side or whether it's on the other side. Regardless, if there's been no change, it's still that whitish reddish, and it has not changed in its color. Therefore, it is unclean, and this one has to deal with it in the way that he said. But look, if you would, to the end of this verse where it says, or look at verse 56. But if the priest has seen it, and behold, now we're going to deal with a change. There is a change according to his eye, and it has become keha. We talked about this word previously. It becomes darker, dimmer. So instead of it being whitish red or green or some other, it has faded and it's become darker after the washing of this ailment. This is what he sees. What should he do? Look at the middle of verse 56. He shall tear it from the garment, or from the leather, or from the warp, or from the weft. So he removes that portion of the infected area. Verse 57. And if he shall look again at the garment, whether it's the warp or the weft or any of the vessels made from leather, and we see here that it has spread out, meaning he removes this. But after removing it, he looks again later on at it, and what has happened? It has spread out. Then the same thing has happened, even though the place that looked problematic has been removed, torn away. But the damaging is still continuing, meaning it's spreading out. In that case, it says, with fire you shall burn it. What is in this ailment, in this area of infection? Verse 58. And the garment, whether it's the warp or the weft, or any vessel, meaning every vessel of leather, which you will wash. And it says you remove from it this affliction, and then you wash it a second time. And if that's the case, that you've done this and it hasn't gone through any change, then it is pure. If it has continued to grow more, obviously it would not be pure, it would be unclean. But here it says that it's pure. For this is the law. Look at verse 59, our last verse. This is the law of the Torah of a ailment of leprosy, for a garment that is wool or one that is linen, whether it's in the warp or in the weft, or anything, any instrument or vessel of leather. And it says, this is the law for saying what is pure and what is unclean. Now, what we're going to do is see that these things are given to the priests in order that they can have discernment for judging. And what's so important is that they have been put into authority to regulate the well-being of the community. This is what we need to remember and focus in on. All of this is to safeguard the community against those things that bring impurity, those things that defile, those things that interrupt and change the status quo. What is the proper condition? That which is pure. And what do we learn? That which is pure, God will bless. That which is unclean, that which is impure, that which is corrupt, God will not bless. But as we saw, with fire it should be burnt up. This is a reference to God's judgment, His displeasure. So in the community, if there is leprosy, this is a sign God is unpleased with some aspect. And the priests who have been given authority, they come and they give discernment, they give the ruling, and one who is guilty, one who is leprous, they are going to be put out of the community until there's a change, until God brings about a change. This is what is being taught. And let me conclude by saying this. It is so significant that Messiah cleansed lepers. Why? This was something that no one else could do. Only Messiah was called to do this as a way of identifying himself, as a way of revealing the nearness of the kingdom. See, Messiah was sent into this world to prepare people, even lepers, for a kingdom change, to get ready for what God was going to do. So let me ask you, are you ready for that coming kingdom? Are you prepared for it? Or is there something in your life or in my life that renders us, in God's estimation, unclean, not pure, not prepared, not fit for being blessed? A wise thing that we should do, just like we've seen over and over, the priest looks at it, there's an evaluation. Well, evaluate your life. How do you do that? By asking God to reveal to you anything that's displeasing to Him. And be sincere and be wanting to agree with God. And what God says is not proper, rid it from your life. What do we learn? Tear it out. Remove it. Why? Well, if it's not dealt with, it is going to be burnt up with fire. Judgment is coming. What does the scripture say? Judgment begins where? At the house of the Lord. That meaning begins with the people of God. So let's come before God sincerely. Let's ask Him to bring about a discernment in our life. Those things that God sees as impure, unclean, unacceptable. And pray that He would help you get rid of those things, to separate yourself from them in order that you are in a condition where God will bless, God will use, and God will bring about a godly influence through you in the life of others. That's what being a disciple is all about. What is that great commission? To go forth and make disciples, teaching them to observe, being an influence on their life, to observe, to do, to obey all the things that the Word of God commands us. That is spiritual maturity. So you're either going to be growing spiritually or you're going to be moving away from the purity that God has called you to bear witness to. Until next time, and we begin chapter 14, my hope is that God will move mightily in your life, that you will experience His pleasure, His blessing, and that you will be used by Him. Until next time, shalom.
Well, we hope you will benefit from today's message and share it with others. Please plan to join us each week at this time and on this channel for our broadcast of LoveIsrael.org. Again, to find out more about us, please visit our website, LoveIsrael.org. There you will find articles and numerous other lectures by Baruch. These teachings are in video form. You may download them or watch them in streaming video. Until next week, may the Lord bless you in our Messiah Yeshua, that is, Jesus, as you walk with Him. Shalom from Israel.